It's like, you know how sometimes you see just a little ripple and it makes you wonder what's really going on underneath?
Yeah.
That's kind of the feeling I'm getting reading these reports about uh, a potential shakeup way up high in U.S. public health leadership.
Oh, for sure. It seems like more than just like a personnel change, you know what I mean?
Right.
When you hear about Dr. Peter Marks and, his reported resignation from the FDA, I think it raises some pretty big questions about, where things are headed with scientific oversight in the Department of Health and Human Services.
Yeah, okay. So first off, for anyone who maybe hasn't heard of him before, who is Dr. Marks and why does this matter?
Right.
Like, what's the big deal here?
So Dr. Marks has been a key figure at the FDA for a while now.
Yeah, he's been around.
He's been the head of CBER since 2016,
CBER for our
the
listeners.
Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research.
Gotcha.
And that's the part of the FDA that's responsible for making sure that things like vaccines, blood products, gene therapies are safe and effective.
Like the really important stuff.
Yes.
The stuff that we all rely on.
And he's actually been with the FDA since 2012.
Wow.
So he's not some newcomer. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah, he's been there through a lot.
He has. And his leadership, especially with CBER, has been so crucial these past few years. Think about the COVID-19 vaccines and how quickly they were developed and authorized.
Right.
His expertise is highly respected in the scientific community.
Which I think is why all these reports about his resignation are so noteworthy.
Yeah, you don't just brush that off.
No, you don't.
Especially when it seems like it wasn't entirely his choice,
Exactly.
Okay.
And according to what we're seeing from sources like BBC News and the Wall Street Journal, this all went down on Friday.
Okay.
And his resignation is supposed to take effect April 5th.
All right.
But here's the kicker. They're saying he was basically given an ultimatum,
Oh, wow.
like resign or be fired.
Yeah, that's a big red flag.
It is, and that points to some serious tension behind the scenes. And when you look at the reasons behind it all, it gets even more interesting and I think more important for all of us,
Absolutely. This isn't just someone deciding to move on to something else.
Right.
This seems like it stems from a really fundamental disagreement about scientific integrity and transparency at the very top of the HHS.
Yeah, and to understand that part, we have to talk about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the new HHS Secretary.
Yeah, his background is a big part of the story.
It is.
You can't ignore it.
So for our listeners who might not be familiar with him, can you give us a little background on Secretary Kennedy?
Sure. So the reports consistently point out that he is a well-known vaccine skeptic,
Okay.
and he has a history of spreading health information that scientists say is false. So think about that for a second. Someone who has publicly questioned things that are widely accepted by the scientific community is now in charge of the department that oversees the FDA.
Yeah, that's bound to cause some friction.
You can imagine how someone like Dr. Marks, who's dedicated his career to evidence-based decision-making, might feel about that.
For sure. And we actually have some pretty strong words directly from Dr. Marks.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In his resignation letter, which has been quoted all over the place, he reportedly wrote, and I'm quoting here, "It has become clear that truth and transparency are not desired by the Secretary, but rather he wishes subservient confirmation of his misinformation and lies."
Wow.
That's pretty heavy.
It is. You don't see language like that very often from someone in such a high-ranking position.
Yeah, he's not mincing words at all.
No, he's not. It suggests that he felt there was a deep disrespect for established science and a real push to promote narratives that just aren't supported by the evidence.
Yeah, and this isn't just disagreeing on a policy.
No, this is about how evidence-based decisions are made.
It's a fundamental difference.
Absolutely.
So what has the HHS said about all of this?
Right. They haven't exactly been silent.
Ralph,
They put out a statement to the BBC, and it's interesting.
what do they say?
Well, they said that if Mr. Marks does not want to get behind restoring science to its golden standard and promoting radical transparency, then he has no place at FDA under the strong leadership of Secretary Kennedy.
Okay, so let's break that down for a second.
Yeah.
Because phrases like golden standard and radical transparency,
They sound good,
they sound good.
don't they?
But when you put them up against what Marx is saying, you start to see maybe a very different interpretation.
Right. Makes you wonder what those words actually mean in this context.
Exactly. So how do you see that contrast?
Well, when scientists talk about the golden standard, they're usually talking about a very rigorous process,
Yeah.
hypothesis testing, data collection, peer review, and a willingness to change your conclusions based on new evidence.
It's about being open to what the data shows.
Exactly. It's not about dismissing well-established scientific findings just because you prefer a different viewpoint,
Right.
especially if that viewpoint doesn't have strong data to back it up.
And what about radical transparency?
Well, that could mean making all the data and the processes completely open, which is generally a good thing in science.
Right.
But it could also be interpreted as giving equal weight to all opinions, even if they're not scientifically valid.
And that's where the problem comes in.
Right, because not all opinions are created equal.
So it sounds like the HHS is trying to frame this as just a difference in approach, you know?
A difference of opinion.
Right. Whereas Marx is saying there's a deliberate disregard for the facts.
Yeah, it's a pretty stark contrast.
It is. And on top of all that, we have these reports about how Dr. Marx himself is feeling about this whole situation, and the Wall Street Journal mentioned that he's leaving with a heavy heart.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that suggests he's not happy about this.
No, it sounds like there's a lot of disappointment there, and maybe even concern about what's to come.
Yeah, you can understand why he'd feel that way.
And then you add in his reported concern about the growing measles outbreak in Texas.
Right.
And it really adds another layer to all of this.
It does, because it's not just an abstract debate anymore.
Right.
It has real-world consequences.
He's actually quoted as saying, and I'm quoting here again, "It reminds us of what happens when confidence in well-established science underlying public health and well-being is undermined."
It's a powerful statement.
It is, and I think it's really important for our listeners to understand just how serious this measles outbreak is. We're talking about 400 out of the 523 U.S. cases being in Texas as of last Friday.
Wow.
And tragically, 2 deaths.
That's awful.
It is, and it's a stark reminder of what can happen when vaccination rates drop.
Right. Measles is highly contagious,
It is.
but it's also preventable through vaccination.
Exactly. And when a top vaccine official, like Dr. Marks, is linking this outbreak to a loss of trust in science at a leadership level, that should give everyone pause.
It should, because high vaccination rates are so important, not just for individual protection, but for community protection, too.
It's about protecting everyone, especially those who are most vulnerable.
Exactly. And when public trust in vaccines weakens, these outbreaks become more likely.
And the consequences can be devastating.
They can.
So zooming out a bit, let's talk about the bigger picture here, because we've also heard that Secretary Kennedy is planning some major restructuring of the entire HHS,
Oh, right.
including potential cuts of around 10,000 employees across agencies like the FDA and the CDC.
Wow.
So do you think that could be playing a role in this whole situation with Dr. Marks?
Oh, I think it's a huge factor. Big organizational changes like that always create uncertainty and anxiety.
Of course.
And then when you combine that with what seems like a fundamental shift in how the leadership use science, well, it's understandable why someone like Dr. Marks might feel uncomfortable.
Right. And these cuts could also be seen as a way to reshape these agencies to be more in line with the Secretary's vision.
Yeah, that's all connected.
It is. So bringing all of this together, what are the key takeaways for our listeners? Why should they care about this?
Well, I think the biggest concern is what this means for public trust in the FDA.
Yeah.
When someone as respected as Dr. Marks feels like he has to resign over concerns about scientific integrity at the top levels of the HHS, it raises questions about the information coming from that agency.
Right. And that information affects all of us.
It does. It affects our well-being.
And this loss of trust could also have a real impact on people's confidence in vaccines.
Absolutely. If you start to think that scientific decisions are being influenced by politics or beliefs that aren't based on evidence, then you might hesitate to trust the recommendations about vaccination.
Right. And that hesitation can have serious consequences, especially with outbreaks like the one we're seeing in Texas.
It's a domino effect.
It is. And this whole situation really makes you wonder about the future of the FDA.
Yeah. Where are things headed?
Will they continue to make decisions based on the best available evidence? Or will we see a shift towards accommodating viewpoints that contradict the science?
That's a question we all need to be asking.
It makes you wonder if Dr. Marks will be the only one to leave.
Right. If other people at the FDA and HHS share his concerns about the direction things are going, we could see more resignations.
And that loss of expertise could really damage these agencies.
It could make it harder for them to do their jobs and protect public health.
So just to recap, we have a top vaccine official reportedly forced out because of a fundamental disagreement about truth and transparency with the new head of the Department of Health and Human Services, who has a history of vaccine skepticism.
Yeah, this deep dive has really exposed a major conflict at the highest levels of U.S. public health.
It has.
Yeah.
And the way terms like golden standard and radical transparency are being used compared to the accusations of misinformation, it's pretty concerning.
It makes you wonder about the future of evidence-based public health guidance.
It does, and it leaves us with a really important question. What happens when the top scientists and the people in charge have such different views on what science and evidence actually are.
Right. How does that affect the information we receive and the decisions we make about our health?
Exactly. And it's a question that deserves a lot more attention and discussion.
It's something we all need to be thinking about and staying informed about.
Because the implications are huge, and this is just the beginning of the story.
Yeah, this is something we'll be following closely.
Absolutely, and we encourage all of our listeners to stay tuned as this develops and to keep asking these important questions.
And to really think critically about the information you come across.
Because ultimately, your health is in your hands.
That's right. Make informed decisions.
And we'll be here to help you navigate this complex world of health and science.
We'll keep digging and keep you updated.
Until next time, stay curious and stay healthy.